Battlefield 1 is a far better game than I gave it credit for in my last review, and this comment from my livestream chat helped me to realise why. This game is best when played like an immersive experience and not as a thing you need to win. So let's go through the good, the great, the nostalgic, and the downright terrible aspects of this iconic game. Plus, why my experience doesn't always line up with that of the average player. This is a huge video, so if you decide to subscribe for more Battlefield content, just know that I always appreciate that. This is a critical review of Battlefield 1 in 2025. Impenetrable classic or starting to show its age? Well, it's still visually stunning. It's as if they took the art direction and said, let's make it timeless. Art direction is really the key term here. It's not as if BF1 keeps pace with the most advanced modern releases in terms of its graphical fidelity or anything that can be measured with a quantitative figure. Yet, it doesn't matter. It's the same reason why a game like Rollercoaster Tycoon still looks visually pleasing all these years down the line. It's about doing the most with what you have to create an experience that visually stimulates and stands the test of time, even as technology far surpasses that of which the game in question is built upon. That is not to say though that Battlefield 1 solely focused upon that aspect and said to hell with realism. In fact, maps such as Ballroom Blitz and Sinai Desert are almost photographic in their attention to detail. Whilst this does have drawbacks from a gameplay standpoint, especially after an extensive amount of playtime, which we'll absolutely cover, it does aid in making the world feel alive and grounded within the World War I experience, at least to a certain degree. Not a one-for-one recreation of World War I, but more so representative rather than replicatory. Something the vast majority feel is enough for them to suspend their disbelief, whereas they struggle more so to do in the following Battlefield 5. And absolutely in Battlefield 2042, where even though it was a title set in the future, it didn't deliver that feeling of actually taking part in a believable wide-scale battle, in a world truly realistically scarred by it. So where the last decade or so of this franchise is concerned, Battlefield 1 takes a clear win for visual immersion and delivering upon a holistic ethos of game creation for a satisfying result that still keeps some players coming back all these years later. But what good are visuals if you can't deliver the audio? Much like a YouTube video, if I sounded like this all the way through, well, you're not going to come back. Thankfully, Battlefield 1 can be used as a case study for how to do wartime audio in a video game. The rumble of tanks in the distance, the crack of sniper fire, and the deep thud of artillery, this game still does immersion better than most, with a level of realism that pulls you right into those trenches, driving home that point about being representative enough to draw the player in, while still essentially being an arcade shooter rather than a pure military simulator. When you go as far as to have voice actors carrying weights as they scream their lines, you know you're in for an excellent result. But as much as I have now lauded praise upon the game for its immersion, it must be stated that this is not the game for you if you do want a genuine, near 100% depiction of the Great War. As examples, prototype weapons have been included within the experience, such as the very popular Hellregal selection. In fact, this gun was put on a pedestal in-game by being made the reward unlocked upon reaching the maximum assault rank of 10. Moreover, automatic weapons in general were far less common, and indeed the frequency at which you encounter tanks is quite extensively exaggerated. To be honest, there's a great deal more that can be covered and can be easily found via a quick scour across Google, but to do so would be to focus upon a niche point that ultimately isn't of great consequence for the target audience of this game. If you want a truly accurate experience, there are games that deliver that. If you want to run around World War I, blast some enemies, and have an authentic enough feeling time, then BF1 has you covered. But an additional point, the single player, otherwise known as War Stories, delivers upon the World War I feeling to an even greater degree. It's not the focus of discussion today, as it's unchanged since it released, unlike the multiplayer, and generally single player experiences are looked upon more so as time capsules in some respect, thus meaning if they were worth experiencing before, they often are now. But to not mention the quality it delivered here on this topic, at least briefly, would be doing the game a great disservice. Just take this in for a moment.
You good?
Yes, mate.
You sure?
Remember that comment from the start of the video about the game being better as an experience rather than something you play to win. That's why we've just spent all of that time covering non-gameplay factors, despite me being a gameplay first player. But gameplay is still incredibly important. So let's talk weapons and gunplay. There's a boatload of weapon variety within Battlefield 1, especially if you get hold of the DLC guns as well. SMGs, semi-auto rifles, LMGs, shotguns, bolt actions, carbines, and so on. There really is a staggering amount to earn, unlock, and experience, without even going on to talk about dog tags and such. Now, it must be said that this game works on a variant structure where the weapons are concerned though, as in different guns have different variants, which could be argued as providing an inflated sense of overall weapon number. That being said, the vast majority of the variants do provide meaningful changes to the experience. Trench variants designed for hipfire, slug shotguns being a very different skill set requirement to buckshot variants and such like. And that's an important point. Skill set. BF1 did a great job of different weapon options and variants playing directly into different playstyles and skill sets. Players often want to develop their way of playing and not feel like they're at a significant disadvantage because they don't want to use a certain type or style of weapon. So whilst BF1 does have a meta, as all FPS games do, the truth is that 80+% of the guns do a perfectly good job as long as the player knows how to use them. It can be said that there's maybe too much of a rock, paper, scissors scenario at play due to the significant strengths and weaknesses of different guns, but at least it means that players can't just pick one gun to excel at absolutely everything. Although there are some standout weapons such as the SMG-08 or indeed the Fedorov Avtomat, which I don't personally feel are excessively overpowered, but they do commit the sin of somewhat invalidating some other weapons at their intended optimal usage ranges. A minor negative point, but not so extreme that it destroys all balance. The most significant way in which the gunplay is perhaps too skewed in one direction for style and viability is map design, but again, we'll get to that later. So sure, the weapons offer a vast array of different playstyles, but how? Well, initially it's by including pretty unique or niche options. Take the RSC SMG Optical as an example. Sure, it is an SMG, but it's a slower firing, small magazine SMG that can kill in 3 bullets to the chest up to 20 meters and 5 bullets up to 30 meters. That's significantly different to your typical spray and pray SMG. Or, within the Scout class, you have the M1903 Experimental. Yes, you can use it as an iron sight variant of the bolt action M1903, or you can switch the fire mode to semi-automatic and fire at 360 rounds per minute with obviously heavily reduced damage per round. Again, very unique options. Don't forget, there's also the rarely seen Peacekeeper sidearm, which is very challenging to unlock, requiring you to complete several complex in-game Easter eggs. But at the start of all that, I said initially, which means there must be a follow-up point for this subject. How else does the game provide different playstyles and skill requirements? Well, pretty much an extension of the unique weapon topic, but applied to all guns. Weapon mechanics. This is not just a point-and-shoot experience. The guns behave in very particular ways and need to be properly managed for optimal performance. Let's do a couple of examples again. So for general LMG play, it tends to be a poor choice to begin firing before aiming down sight, as you'll experience wild spread even after aiming in. Or again, a general rule of thumb is that for medic semi-auto rifles, whilst you can spam them at their max rate of fire, it's often a suboptimal idea to do so at anything outside their optimal range, or even sometimes within it. Even if you aim well, firing at that speed, at range, will cause far more missed shots. And there's way more to it than those, of course, making for a deep, knowledge-based experience to master rather than just purely raw mechanical input. For some, this is satisfying. For others, too large a barrier to entry at this point. Unless, of course, we reference that important point again, take this as an experience first, rather than just something to win at. But there is one specific weapon mechanic that needs its own focus here, the sweet spot. And it needs its own focus because its implementation affects the game differently depending upon your platform. So the sweet spot mechanic allows bolt action rifles to one-shot kill an enemy to the chest within a certain range. So for example, within 30 to 50 meters. Not before that and not after it. So different bolt actions are therefore viable for different engagement types, creating variety without requiring a headshot. On console, I personally don't and have not considered this to be a significant issue. There are plenty of counter-sniping options, and I don't tend to see snipers dominating lobbies unless they're extremely good. I have, however, historically heard more complaints about it from the PC community, where aiming tends to be faster and more precise due to using a mouse, leading to bolt action rifles being more oppressive with the sweet spot mechanic. If you play on PC, feel free to leave your feedback on this in the comments, or any comments about this topic today are of course very welcome. And a side point for the sweet spot mechanic is that it's somewhat buffed more so than other weapons via another mechanic, the manual or 3D spotting. In BF1, you can spot the enemy with a button or key press, which temporarily highlights them on the minimap and within the playing experience itself, with a red icon above them. I personally like this mechanic, as it negates issues with enemy visibility, something that plagued Battlefield 5 for a lot of players, but this is a topic that tends to split opinion and is purely personal preference. Either way, it's obviously easier to track a target at range with a bolt action rifle using 3D spotting as opposed to not having it. So that's a look at weapons, but the guns only make up one part of the overall gunplay experience. The other part is of course movement. How did the players make their way to a fight and then traverse the gunfight itself? Well, the positive spin is that the movement is grounded in reality, at least to some degree. For those that aren't interested in or dislike advanced movement techniques, BF1 doesn't have them. No extreme jumps, no wall running, no backflips or emotes. The most you have is a fairly limited knee slide, or butt slide as it sometimes appears. So, if you're keen to experience World War I with fairly heavy and limited movement, you're in luck. You get to feel like a World War I soldier dragging himself across the fields as he prays to avoid the bullets whizzing by. So what about the negative spin? Well, whilst I do understand and appreciate the movement being limited to within the realms of somewhat reality, and I don't have a problem with using it that way, it does feel very clunky and dated at this point, at least to me. I caught a lot of flack last year for this point, as people thought I meant I wanted more advanced movement when I truly don't. It's not needed in a World War I shooter, but it could feel a little bit smoother, more reliable and more responsive. You have to carefully consider the movement the whole time, as it really will limit what you can do, not just in a realism sense, but just because it is that bit clunky. Hey, you might like that, but something that is undeniable is that the game's desire to throw you off ladders without warning via a bug is extremely irritating, alongside a frequent inability to set up your bipod or mantle objects. But the worst, by far, is your soldier being forced to lie down instead of climbing over something. Yes, that happens pretty frequently and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, it must be said that these issues are minor in the grand scheme of things and really won't dent the experience of a new player too much. And after all, it is all about the experience, right? Well, if you can't fully buy into that notion, then sure, these issues will become a little more irritating the longer you play for. Keep it in mind, maybe you'll be able to look past the problem. But switching gears, with gears being the apt term here, infantry combat alone isn't Battlefield. Vehicles obviously have at least an equal place at the table, so how's the balance versus infantry? Well, as a purely infantry focused player, I'll say it's not exactly a perfect balance, but I am biased, keep that in mind. But trying to be as unbiased as possible, the tanks are more balanced than in Battlefield 5. These tanks are strong, but can be countered. You don't see one and expect 100% death every time, and you do have plenty of anti-tank measures, even from range. You have the rocket gun here, you have the limpet, you have the anti-tank grenade, and so on. Very, very effective gadgets. But planes are an issue, especially the Ilya Muromets, a bomber of terrifying power. If this thing goes overhead, you're meeting the Reaper very soon. There's also attack planes, and they can be extremely irritating, especially with the map design, but they can be countered more easily by anti-aircraft guns, or just team play by shooting at them with other allies, although that can be a bit of a pipe dream. More on that later when we get to the more specific negatives. There's also cavalry in the game, absolutely counterable and definitely only good if the player using them is good, but the horses do require a lot of disbelief suspension. They can tank a lot of bullets and just keep going, although they do get blasted by the AT rocket gun, and indeed the AT grenade, which they should really, they're horses. But back to the negative, what about the mortar artillery trucks? Absolute vehicle easy mode, sit super far away from the fight and just blow the enemy away. I hate this thing, absolutely infuriating. There's also though transport vehicles, and they aren't an issue. In fact, they can be fun. You got cars, boats, bikes, pretty cool variety. There's even airships in this game sometimes. All in all, vehicles are fun for those that enjoy them. There's generally a skill gap and they're mostly balanced, mostly. There's just some outliers that really stand out. There's also actually some outliers that massively stand out, but they are supposed to. There's sort of a comeback mechanic in Battlefield 1. So let's say you're playing Conquest and your team is getting absolutely destroyed. Well, now your team gets a Behemoth, or Behemoth, depending on which way you want to pronounce it, depending on where you're from. It's a huge, massively powerful vehicle. It can be, for example, a destroyer ship, an oversized tank, or even the iconic airship. Not the little airships I just referenced a minute ago, but an absolutely gigantic one from the trailer. This brings me to both a negative and a positive point. I briefly referenced earlier that team play to shoot down planes is often a bit of a pipe dream. What I mean by that is the vehicles have seemingly been balanced around the idea that they can be countered by multiple people focusing them down, thus making them far more balanced. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen often enough, which can be viewed as a flaw within the design of the game, focusing on a perfect world scenario that was never going to happen, or you could see it as a flaw with the overall community. Regardless, it can be an issue but does allow organized squads to shine. Or you could, as an individual, choose to take a more niche gadget and dedicate yourself to anti-air play, for example, with the anti-air rocket gun. But I do find that makes you a lot less versatile than taking something like the anti-tank rocket gun, which can be used against tanks and trucks and infantry and whatever else. Again, that's the benefit of having an organized squad though. One of your players may have the anti-air rocket gun, whilst everyone else has the more regularly useful gadgets. More on squads and clans later, as they are extremely impactful upon the experience at this point. And all in all, BF1 has a better team play experience overall than Battlefield 5. As forced team play in BF5 via attrition was really painful for any player not playing with an organized squad a lot of the time, especially on those big open maps. But back to team play regarding vehicles, here's the positive. Thankfully, the Behemoth is such a big deal and so noticeable that players generally do tend to try to focus them down. Thank the Battlefield gods that they do, otherwise Behemoths would absolutely farm infantry until the end of the game. It does happen from time to time, but it's a pretty regular occurrence to see a Behemoth get blown up, which is always satisfying. Perks and Afflictions. These add another layer of depth to the experience. They're unlockable buffs, or indeed debuffs, to benefit your playstyle or make the game more challenging for you. I really like this system. The perks aren't overpowered at all, just subtly tailoring the experience to something you enjoy and helps you to perform that little bit better. Whereas the Afflictions are extremely strong, they have effects such as causing you to lose 1 health per second, keeping you permanently spotted on the minimap, and forcing you to keep your gas mask on at all times, for those that want to play the game on hard mode. So before we get to the true negatives of this experience in 2025, all of the points I have made so far combine to create a solid, immersive World War I themed sandbox experience primed to be enjoyed by new players who have likely never played something with that specific mix. It pretty successfully walks the line between war simulation and arcade shooter. Not a perfect marriage, and for sure leaning more towards arcade, but still bringing heavy amounts of that somber World War I feel. That can also bring Battlefield 1 veterans back from time to time, as the nostalgia can be strong with this game. Or indeed, there are still people playing this game daily, even all these years later. So it must be doing something right, even if it drives me personally insane at times. It brought a cohesive vision that really delivered and stands up all these years later. A vision muddied and eventually lost over the next 2 releases, as the franchise significantly then lost its way. It's worth mentioning that, as this game is around 9 years old now, you are restricted to playing with and against players purely on your platform. There is no cross-platform play. So if you're on PC and your friend is on PlayStation, you will not be able to play together. This also limits the overall population size, which does bring some significant issues with it, which will be covered in the next section. But it does mean that there's no issue with disparity between mouse and keyboard and controller, keeping everything on a level playing field. Unless someone is cheating, which unfortunately will also come up in the next section, yes, there are some pretty terrible drawbacks for BF1 coming up. But overall, for a new player or someone returning for a nostalgic look, BF1 still shines bright. A massive credit to it for that. It does also have a fully functional server browser, unlike Battlefield 2042, and I suggest you always use the server browser so you can guarantee finding a populated lobby. So if I can express all of those positive points whilst being the most jaded person on this game, that's a good sign. I am absolutely burnt out on this product and have the streamer mentality of just playing it for work at this point, which is why my perspective is so different to that of your average player or new player. It's also why I perhaps made some slight missteps with my review last year. This is a game better off enjoyed as an experience rather than something to win, and if you haven't absolutely had your fill of that experience, then it probably has something worthwhile to offer you. But we must now hit the truly bad aspects that now plague this game. Okay, so not as much here to cover as the positive section, but some of these are big negatives. The first one being the biggest problem I now have with the game that I simply didn't have during its active life cycle, at least nowhere near to this degree. Ping, or rather high ping, and not just playing on high ping, but playing against high ping. Ping is essentially your latency to the server, how good/fast your connection to it is. In a lot of games, playing on high ping is detrimental to your experience and performance. In Battlefield, it's not quite that simple. Playing against players with high ping, even if yours is fine, creates an extremely unreliable experience, as their poor ping combined with lag compensation and sometimes servers just not performing optimally creates gunfights with random or totally unfair outcomes. And that's even when the ping just exceeds 50, I have found, surprisingly, where the game then represents it as a 3-bar rather than a 4-bar connection. So you're high ping, they're high ping, both of you, whatever, the experience can be just crushed. Here are some of the clips I featured last year to showcase this.
Right, can you die, bro?
We are losing.
Wow, dude. I mean, I'm stood directly behind the guy, bro. That's what 108 ping will do for you. Are you kidding? Appeared around the door and then just melted me. Dice, that's dumb. 150 ping. There's no way I didn't win that fight. Got 132 ping. He is moving around it. Interestingly. Also has 200 ping, so I wonder if the two could be connected at all. Are you kidding?
Now I'm okay with high ping making the experience less reliable for the player who actually has high ping. That's unfortunate but understandable. Incentivizing having a good connection is logical, rather than punishing someone for having a good connection, or even sometimes rewarding the player with a bad connection. Unfortunately, that's just not how it works in Battlefield. I now tend to find that going to a server where your ping is most similar to other players in the server is the best option, rather than just finding a server where your ping is the lowest. The game just does a terrible job with high ping, leading to a total lack of trust in the gunfights. So why is this an issue now if it wasn't really before? Well, it's the lack of players, meaning that lobbies now get filled with players from all over the world playing outside their region. It's not the fault of those players, they just want to play the game. But if you have a game that handles high ping so poorly and then doesn't have region locks or ping limiters on the official servers, you've got yourself a big problem. A problem that gets even more noticeable the more you play the game and the better you get at it. Knowing when you should win a gunfight and then frequently losing it can be very frustrating. Whereas if you're not that good at the game, or you're new, or you're used to losing more gunfights than you win, or whatever it might be, these things can kind of just wash over you. Remember that this game doesn't have crossplay, so those population counts are split across the platforms. So if you're on a platform that has a decent amount of players, you'll be less harshly hit by this. But on, say, Xbox, where I play for example, it can be pretty rough. This low population count also affects how many modes you get to play. Take Xbox again as the example. The vast majority of the time, it's Conquest, Grand Ops, and Team Deathmatch. You get lucky once in a blue moon, when the weekly rotation decides to feature a different mode. I love Frontlines as a mode, but I get to play it for 1, maybe 2 weeks a year, which sucks. Although I do hear that on PC, there's usually at least one Frontline server active, so just know that I'm very jealous of you. But there is a third way, and even a fourth way, in which the low population count now really hurts the game. Hence why I feel it's more so geared towards new players or those returning for nostalgia, as they won't care or notice the downsides as much. The third way it hits is in the skill balancing system. The game tries to somewhat balance lobbies based on overall ability of the two teams. This sounds decent on paper, of course, but it doesn't actually work, because it doesn't take into account, or rather can't do anything about, fixed squads, or the major problem, clans. Clans are organized groups of players. They obviously tend to perform far better on average than a random group of players. The skill balancer therefore moves the better players to play on the opposite team to the clan or clans. This is almost never enough to swing the balance, and means that better solo players have to feel like they're playing at a significant disadvantage, probably at least 3/4 of the time. Honestly, I think just random shuffling to create variance from round to round is far superior. Let set squads play together, of course, then randomly assign that squad or those squads to either team, and randomly assign individual players to either team. Basically, if you can't create balance, don't try to force balance, leaving better players having a constant uphill battle, and then lesser players feeling like they're just along for the ride of a predetermined result. Just create variance with random reshuffling. But how does that point apply to low population counts? Well, there were of course squads and clans before, but with the game now having so few players by comparison, it's now incredibly common for the available lobbies to be dominated by these players, which is a shame. But it must be said that social play and teamwork is something to be commended. And the fourth way in which the low population count hurts the game, cheating. Obviously cheating is always a problem, but when a game has less players, it tends to become increasingly more noticeable, especially when on average the players left playing take the game a lot more seriously or just want to win no matter what. On PC, cheating in-game is probably something you're very familiar with, doesn't require any real explanation. Yes, it is a constant battle, but it also happens on console, with players using Cronus hardware to do things such as remove recoil, or Zims to play with mouse and keyboard on console while still getting console aim assist. Honestly, whether on PC or console, this just sucks all around and is fairly prevalent. But actually much more so I think in Battlefield 5. I've previously made a full video on cheating in Battlefield, be it Cronus, Zim, leaderboard manipulation and more. I even spoke to such a cheater for the video. If you want to watch it, I'll try to remember to put a link in the description so you can watch it afterwards. If I forget to do that, please feel free to remind me in the comments. So aside from the low player count, what else can make the experience a drag? Well, map design. Now, full disclosure, I regularly have an issue with Battlefield map design. I dislike certain elements in BF1, I really disliked certain elements in BF5, and BF 2042 had such bad maps that they had to literally try to rework them throughout the game's life cycle. I really hope the next Battlefield has much better maps. At the end of the day though, these are personal preferences, but from my perspective, a lot of the maps are too big and open, resulting in sometimes very frustrating gameplay loops, spawn trapping, vehicle domination, and honestly sometimes just a very one-note experience of trying to work out if you're going to sit and maybe get bored, or run across the open and almost inevitably get picked off. Personal preference, but I know there are a lot of players that agree with me. All in all, doesn't seem that bad though, right? Frustrating issues, but likely only really frustrating for those that play an excessive amount and aren't just there for the experience. But look at the runtime of this video, we aren't done. As with last year, I've thrown 2 other full-length pieces of content in here that I made back when the game was a lot more populated, ran better, and I enjoyed the game more, to really try and ram home how it did shine then and to some degree still can. Hopefully those 2 productions you're about to watch, along with everything I've already said here today, will help you to decide if BF1 is worth it for you in 2025 and perhaps beyond. Remember, I always appreciate your subscription as we look to grow the channel, including the second channel as well, which you can find in the description. Like the video and please continue to enjoy. Film or music can make people feel something emotionally. It's becoming more and more widely accepted now that games can do the same thing. It's an art form in its own sense, and Battlefield 1 really encapsulates that premise. So not in the usually found way that a game might make you feel something, be it excitement or frustration or sometimes anger. No, this is a deeper feeling, whether it be admiration, sadness, nostalgia, shock and awe, or any number of other feelings, because this game, in that sense, was an absolute masterstroke. But we're not looking at this as a direct comparison with Battlefield 5. That would seek only to devalue the statements being made. In fact, we don't need to compare it with any other game out there. We don't need comparison points. We need only look at the qualities of this game in isolation to see the value that it holds. What I want you to really focus on today while you listen is what you're actually seeing displayed. Fully take it in, be present in the moment, and truly appreciate both the minute details and the vast expanses being displayed in what is now, perhaps even more obviously than before, a genuinely impressive World War I experience. This is Battlefield 1, the emotional masterpiece. Battlefield 1 is an obviously beautiful game, a point that barely needs making, one that's been raised an innumerable number of times ever since we got our first glimpse of the game what is now some years ago. There are inaccuracies of course, but for many they're minor enough that their impact is near insignificant. Only minor amounts of suspending disbelief are necessary for your average player who isn't some kind of history buff. And for the vast majority of those who are clued up on World War I, well, it may not be as accurate as they would like. The emotional tone of the game is still undeniably brilliant. The art style makes it feel almost real, it's believable, it's squint and it might be reality kind of art design, very different to what we can find elsewhere a lot of the time. It's got that genuine feel to it. You can see it as some kind of replica of where they're trying to portray, of the world we're in, of the world war that we're experiencing in the game. It doesn't feel phony, it doesn't feel forced, and that allows the key aspects of the game to actually hit home with us while we're playing. The colors work, the perspective works, the sizes of things work, the textures work, it all combines as not just a game but an art presentation. Battlefield 1 also showed that the feeling of being within an actual world matters in a game such as this, in a game where you're presenting World War I. A conflict that engulfed the world at large should make you feel like you're actually in a world being engulfed by that conflict. The skybox displays this, the out of bounds areas display this. You can see far off into the distance, know you can't go there, and yet still feel like the battles are taking place out there. You are but one individual in a wider conflict, expanding outside of the 64 player game you might be in right now. Somehow, in some way that I can kind of explain but not fully, Battlefield 1 does this better than I've seen elsewhere. Either by luck or by design, they made it feel as though you are one cog in a massive machine, squaring off against another massive machine, within a world that you can recognize as your own but isn't familiar, as it's battle scarred in ways that the vast majority of us simply can't relate to. The feeling of being within that world matters. The landscapes therefore feel genuine, whether it be a narrow street, with the walls on each side being a mere few meters apart, or the wide open countryside, punctuated with smoke, explosions and gunfire. There's no awkward or distracting colouring. The majority of the time the colours and tone of the game retain that realistic factor, while still at times being vivid and beautiful. Something that lends itself to no HUD mode if you choose to play without one, being absolutely stunning. Take the UI off the screen and engage in escapism. Allow yourself to feel as if you're really there. And for me, there's no attempt at what comes across as false atmosphere. It all rings true in a way that you really will struggle to find elsewhere. Most of the visibility factors, aside from the perhaps too strong contrast, along with the effects and the level of detail, are possible in this game without being a detracting factor most of the time due to manual spotting or 3D spotting. Whether you like that mechanic or not, whether you want it to be in this game or other games or not, it did allow Battlefield 1 to be presented in this manner and still have the gameplay flow and feel engaging and intuitive. Moving on from that and a focus on the visuals, of course I must briefly mention the sound. I'm going to use that word again, genuine. Explosions, gunfire, the direction of the sounds, everything. It all helps to portray the situation to an impressive degree, and of course, in conjunction with that, it's the music of the game, the theme tunes. They're beautiful in their own regard. Some who experience this game will hear that music and recognize it. It'll take them back to playing this game. But of course, it's not just the audio and visuals that have this impact, it's the way the game is constructed. How set pieces are almost formed by the map design. How different the landscapes are, giving giving you a sense of how much the world was genuinely affected by this war, all presented on a grand scale, but with an artistic touch that doesn't detract from the experience. Instead, it enhances it. The cinematic aspects of the game, such as the Zeppelin looming overhead, or it crashing down to earth and killing those below, they can be breathtaking moments, and a reasonable balance was struck with them. Cinematics, animations, extra touches balanced with the gameplay. DICE had yet to take this aspect too far in Battlefield 1, something they undeniably would do in the near future. But perhaps for the point being raised today, most importantly is the harrowing reality displayed. People die. There's no hiding it, it's displayed for you. In the opening portion of the game you have to play through before choosing what you want to do in Battlefield 1, you embody many different individuals. You're informed that you're not expected to survive, and you don't. With each person inside of them looking through their eyes, you fall, you die. And each time your short life is displayed on screen. Not just saying this is what happens in this video game, but saying this is what happened in this war that actually took place. Each soldier dies as you control them, and you simply move on to the next one to die with them as well, and again and again. The cutscenes in this game don't shirk the truth. This is war. This is what became of people's lives, often with either their own ending or themselves ending the life of another. It's not glorified, it's not celebrated, it's simply presented. All of that combined is why for me, Battlefield 1 is an emotional masterpiece, and one that we know is hard to replicate. And I'm looking forward to diving back into it again soon.
They push, we push. Every once in a while, we push hard enough that the light breaks through the clouds, and a world beyond the war glimmers, just out of reach. The war is the world, and the world is the war. But behind every gun sight is a human being. We are those people. We are the jaded, we are the naive, we are the honorable and the criminal. We are the bound for legend and the lost to history. We are the knights of the sky, the ghosts in the desert, and the rats in the mud. These are our stories.
Today we're talking specifically about only in Battlefield 1 moments. Although Battlefield 5 has some moments such as these available, they're infinitely fewer and more far between. But this isn't a video designed to bash BF5. I mention it purely because this video idea started out as basically a comparison, showing things in BF1 that you can't do in BF5. But then I came up with some ideas that you can't do in any of the other Battlefields. And then on top of that, I came up with some ideas that you can't do in any of the games at all that I know of. And so I decided rather than make it complicated, let's just mix them all into this one list of 20, and I've called it only in Battlefield 1. If I mention anything in this video that you can do in another game or whatever, well now you know why. Don't take it super literally, it's just a fun video concept. Let me know if your own only in Battlefield 1 things in the comments below, and which of mine is your favourite. Now in no particular order, let's do this. We'll open with enter a World War I death maze. This was special, an Easter egg or challenge, the final one in fact, required in order to unlock a secret gun. On Passchendaele there was a blocked up entrance to be found that you could unlock via entering a series of commands via 2 input devices. The correct pattern blew open the entrance and gave you the opportunity to enter the secret death maze. Once inside you had many different levels of the same layout. Do you go north, east, south or west? Get it right and you drop down to the next level. Get it wrong and you die. Brilliant work from DICE and a truly unique moment. Look up a tutorial on YouTube if you'd like to visit it for yourself. Next up is be a tank hunter. Battlefield 1 had sentries or elite pickup kits, and one of those is the ridiculously fun tank gewehr, a kit built around a super high powered rifle, an anti-tank rifle. Now I know some of you right now are keen to bring up the anti-tank rifles in BF5, but please, let's not pretend they feel like the same thing. The tank gewehr kit punches hard, and actually does significant damage to tanks. Getting the kit makes you the only one on the battlefield using it, plus it comes with a double barrel shotgun as your secondary. It's miles ahead, and I mean miles ahead, of using an anti-tank rifle in Battlefield 5, which ended up being kind of underwhelming to be honest. Only in BF1 do you truly get to feel the power of this thing, and from a sentry pickup, becoming an actual tank hunter. Now when I grabbed this thing for footage, I damaged a couple of vehicles, but someone jumped in both times to land the finishing blow on them. Mega frustrating from a content capturing perspective, but what I've been demonstrating for you is the disgusting power it holds against infantry. It blows chests open with absolute ease. One of my personal favorite things in Battlefield 1. Next up is use a Behemoth. Something that split the community massively to be honest. Behemoths are huge super-powered vehicles that become available for the losing team in certain circumstances on certain maps. Incredibly frustrating to deal with at times, undeniably, but also another unique experience. Something definitely not present within BF5 or indeed a vast number of other games. What you're seeing is me manning a machine gun mounted on top of an airship, trying and largely failing to take down enemy aircraft. And just to add to that only in Battlefield feeling, my time up there ended as an enemy apparently had parachuted onto the airship from a passing plane and proceeded to melee me to death. Just fantastic work. Next up is be a sniper medic. Yep, the medic class had a rifle called the General Lu, a semi-automatic option. However, it has an alternate fire mode which turns it into effectively a sniper rifle, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know the technical term for what happens, but basically, it can one-shot body shot at certain ranges. So while BF5 has bolt-action carbines within the medic class, which can one-shot headshot, BF1 offers you the opportunity to one-shot people to the body, whilst also being able to switch back to the semi-auto fire mode, as and when you please. A genuine sniper medic, albeit without a scope, so I guess maybe more so a marksman. Whatever, it's just another option on the list of the vast amount of ways to play Battlefield 1. Next up, Burton Burning, a special one. We're continuing with the theme of alternate fire modes providing different ways to play the game. The Burton is a support class weapon that has incendiary rounds available as an alternate fire mode. Now sure, they still work against infantry as you're seeing, but they're designed predominantly for anti-air, making light work of enemy planes foolish enough to pass overhead. But I think more importantly than that is what you can do to enemy airships. Remember those that I mentioned just a little bit earlier? Well this time, and this is the true only in Battlefield 1 moment, rather than being the sucker sitting on top of it getting meleeed to death, I'm the hunter this time. My Burton is set to fire incendiary rounds. I'm pummeling the airship with all I've got, and my reward is taking it down over the course of a few minutes, picking up a multi-kill and of course, the phenomenal sight of a flaming enemy airship crashing to the ground below. Next up, use cavalry. Name me another Battlefield game where you can ride a horse across the open fields of World War II like this. In fact, you'll struggle to find another first-person shooter out there that offers this. And the closest game I can think of off the top of my head with anything like this is Assassin's Creed, which isn't exactly similar to Battlefield. This is a genuine standout aspect of Battlefield 1, an iconic gaming image. Next is cause Hellregal Rage. Anyone that played BF1 for a decent chunk of time while it was the latest game in the series will know that the Hellregal got a lot of people very upset. I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing, just that it's a thing. Hellregal usage at one point made up a huge percentage of overall weapon selection. It honestly wasn't as overpowered as many thought it was, but it had a massive magazine and was reasonably consistent, and to this day, I still get people in my comment section complaining about it. Next, we have use GetGoodGuy's worst gun in gaming. Yep, in BF1 you can use the weapon I've hated using the most in any game ever. Not because it's the least effective, but because it's actually supposed to be effective, and yet I can't see a damn thing through the iron sights on offer. This is the Enfield and I hate it. You can change the sights to the radial ones, but I don't like those either. So essentially what we have here is a precision weapon that I simply can't be precise with due to a near total lack of vision while aiming with it. Some people have told me they have no issues with the sights, and that's cool, good for them, but I just can't understand how anyone anyone sees through this mess. So yeah, I hate this gun, that's all there is to it. Okay, onwards, use the secret gun, the weapon that I referred to earlier. The reward for completing the final challenge, the Death Maze, is the Peacekeeper. A revolver with unique animations, an awesome skin featuring skulls, the ability to fan fire the gun super fast, and the potential to one-shot headshot. Secret weapon unlocks via challenges are always great in my book, and BF1's offering is so much fun to use. Again, look up some tutorials and unlock this thing for yourself, but beware, it's pretty time consuming and difficult. Next up, limpet charges. Hilarious things these. Something I sorely miss when I go to BF5. They're just such a troll gadget. Chuck them at anything you want, let them stick, run away, and boom. Super simple, super satisfying, and great for demolition jobs as well. Moving on, use the world's smallest pistol, the Calibri. It's freaking tiny, and it's gone down in folklore as one of the worst guns ever to appear in a video game. It does about 4 or 5 damage to the body, meaning you have no chance of spamming an enemy down with a clip full of body shots. Your only chance is to utilize the boosted headshot damage, which will see you drop them in 4 or 5 shots. Another very trolly option and another iconic Battlefield 1 asset. Next up, fight in Argonne Forest. Okay, so this may appear in some other games out there, I have no idea, but it for sure isn't present in another Battlefield game that I'm aware of. It's a really simple one. I'm including it because it's my favorite map I've played on since I started making Battlefield content on YouTube. It's so much fun, and the different sections of the map provide varied choke points, flanking routes, and such like. Brilliant map design. Next, we have Core's SMG-08 Rage. Basically, this is what replaced the Hellriegel as the dominant assault weapon use choice in Battlefield 1. A huge magazine and the ability to spray and pray to your heart's content. Once again, I'm not saying if it's good or bad, just highlighting its existence, and I now move on before anyone rages too hard. Next is Syringe Revive. So simple, so dearly missed. I get what they thought they were providing with all the animations in BF5, but for me, nothing beats the ability to quickly syringe people back from the dead in BF1, and it seems to highly incentivize everyone to revive far more often. A better experience for all. Please bring it back in BF6. Next up, enter a zombie room. So on Fort Devoe, there's a door that rumbles and shakes, and there are noises coming from behind it. This became affectionately known as the zombie room among the Battlefield community. If you go around the map destroying signs and pressing buttons behind them in the right order, the zombie room door opens. But don't actually expect a zombie to be behind there, okay? You'll just be disappointed. It's actually another puzzle to solve. Look up a tutorial to see what you have to do. Next, use the Martini Henry, the ultimate one-bang blaster. We're gonna rapid fire this one and the remaining ones out now. Line up your shot, aim for the chest, boom, the chest is gone. Incredibly fun. Then we have Gas People, or indeed yourself. Gas irritated a lot of people, but that doesn't change that it's something BF5 and a lot of other games don't have. Throw the gas and let it do the work for you. Next, use the rocket gun. I mean, man, what's not to like with this? Whether it be against infantry, buildings, or vehicles, the rocket gun is awesome. And for me, it totally wipes the floor with the bazooka, the Panzerfaust, and the Piat of Battlefield 5. Bags of fun. Then we have smash holes in wood. This might seem like a tiny thing, but for me, it's a big deal. In BF5, when you hit doors or fences, nothing much happens, at least from my experience. But in BF1, if you select a melee weapon that can destroy wood, you can create holes in doors and fences to use them to your advantage. Something I really miss from BF1, and I again hope returns in BF6. And finally, we have be constantly killed by planes. Okay, so this one is a bit of a stretch, as BF5 has had some periods where planes were very powerful, but seriously, I got so used to being killed by planes and tanks and whatever in BF1 that I even made a video called Vehicle Death Simulator, so I couldn't not have the premise be part of this video. And with that, that's my list of things you can only do in BF1. Now let me know which one is your favorite and any you can think of that aren't in my list.